Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We are actually here to officially launch our book, Carbon Capture Utilization, Law, Policy, Standardization Perspectives. And then here I have with myself here Alberto, which is Alberto Fossa, co-editor of the book, and also joining from Ireland, because I think even though he's based in Aberdeen, I think he's in Ireland at this moment, Thomas Muinzer, which is also co-editor. And also here at the University of São Paulo, where we're doing physically the event, we also have Karen and also Alexandre, which also involve the contributors to the book. And then I will just talk for around 15 minutes or so, a little bit about the background of the book. And after that, my colleague Thomas will join, follow up with his insights related to the context of the book itself. And then we'll conclude with Alberto, who will talk a little bit about the university role of the University of São Paulo in this book and his core expertise about standardization. So if you consider here actually the challenge we face today, mostly related to energy transition, climate change. Energy is the key sector that provides much more CO2 contribution to the challenges related to climate change. Of course, you need to consider also agriculture, other chemicals, cement, other industries as well. But the main actually contributor is energy, if you consider in buildings, in transport, in the heavy industries, etc. So in order to consider solutions to address climate change, especially this year we have COP in Brazil happening later this year, is actually, if you consider different studies from different international organizations or national governments, or including energy companies, carbon utilization storage, it is actually an important technology to help to reduce these emissions. So just in two different graphs, with actually from one's from related to Wood Mackenzie, and this previous one related to the International Energy Agency, which talks about the role on CCUS to address climate change. And of course, then the question is, what is carbon capture utilization or use in storage? Is actually that you need to consider two separate elements. One of them is actually when you talk about the short-term storage, another one is a permanent storage. So this is why we go back to why one of the key issues when you find out the challenges we face in this book, it is actually majority of the countries in the world, they heavily focus on the first part of this terminology. They're much focused on the storage. They're focusing about capturing the CO2 and storing CO2, the CCS. They're not so much talking about the utilization, So if you go back to most legislation, including if you go to US, you go to even recently, there is a new regulation in Brazil law that also deals with CCS, also covers this issue. And you go to most European countries, they also address some of these issues. So the challenge is that how to deal with utilization, because what's the essence on carbon capture? You take the CO2 actually either from the atmosphere or before actually reaching the atmosphere, and you're gonna capture it and you store it in probably oil and gas reservoir, most likely. But then the utilization, that's where many countries, including here in Brazil, mostly by Petrobras and some other companies, oil and gas in the world, they use a lot for UR. They actually use the CO2 to enhance the oil recovery, which instead of using, for example, natural gas, they can use CO2 to actually stimulate this oil field. And that's actually the key difference from the utilization between the CCS in terms of financing, because one of the key challenges, if you think from more, let's say, a long-term solution to CCS, it is, what is this business? Because in the day that who is going to pay for you to put a project, add infrastructure, or even reuse someone else's infrastructure to be able to put the CO2 into this cave or whatever location, unless if you're in a country like you are in many of the North America and European countries, you might have a regulated carbon market. But if you go to most parts of the world, especially in Global South, we don't have well-regulated or even forced market for carbon market. Then you don't have actually incentives to do that. Then you rely on governmental funding, which most likely might not be there anyhow. So that's why, at the end of the day, that if you look into the map on potential places for CCS, theoretically speaking, you say, well, there is, and you see that the yellow mark is where you have like I would say like a more likely strong possibility to develop CCS. You see that there is a lot of potential in the Middle East, but it's not probably being used so far. There is a lot in Eastern Europe. Certainly there's a lot in North America that is being predominant going on at this moment. There is some actually potential in between where Thomas are, in between actually in the North Sea there, between UK and actually Norway. There is some potential as well in the southern part of Brazil, and then some northern parts there between actually Venezuela and Colombia. Then there is some potential there in Australia. But if you see in reality, the key countries really doing this, you see, of course, then the question is that in this graph here, also not only covers actually CCS, but might be using correlated technologies, including, for example, natural-based solutions and actually BECCS as well. But if you think purely from a CCUS perspective, you see this map here, you see predominantly you have US, that was the case over the past few years and still the case, and then you see upcoming actually Qatar, and then Australia, and then Canada, and here as in Brazil as well, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and China. So if you see the potential in the world is not well addressed vis-a-vis the reality, because if you see that these countries here, the vast majority of them, either they have financial incentives from the government, like for example, the Reduction Inflation Act from the United States, or they actually have a well-regulated carbon market, or they are in a very wealthy nation who is really providing these resources, like for example, UAE, Saudi, or Qatar, that can afford that, So countries that they don't have a very strong financial government who can provide these incentives, or don't have a very well-regulated carbon market, you become in a very difficult scenario to develop these technologies, And companies, of course, they are looking dollar investment-wise. Probably they might have other solutions. Maybe, for example, reforestation might be much cheaper, or natural-based solutions vis-a-vis CCUS, So certainly they consider these realities. And then if you think a little bit from, we will lead into the challenges in the COPs, historically, and even today, the challenge of the key countries producing much more CO2. You see the common countries in the sense of US, China, and then India, Russia, and then historically UK, US, Germany, France. And if you think from actually between producing and consuming, you see more or less similar ones, China, US, India, Germany, Russia. And if you see historically, which is a more fair assumption, go back to over 200 years ago, you see that US, China, Russia, and Germany, UK are the key contributors to climate change. So the challenge you face here is that who is going to pay for that? And that's the key challenge from CCUS. Who is going to finance CCUS development? Because if you go back to the Global South, they don't have nor their financial resources. They also don't have the fiscal system to allow it to afford that, nor they have a carbon market regulated to do that. So that's why, unfortunately, if you go back to the map of the world, the key countries doing this are the more developed countries, or at least with a much better financial system to allow them to develop this technology, or countries being very smart, like, for example, places like national oil companies or even oil and gas companies as well, who are using a lot of EOR as a key tool to finance that. Because in this case, with the enhanced oil recovery, you pump more oil, and if the oil you keep pumping more, then you have actually more means to actually capture more CO2 because you have a financial system to do that. But if you're not in that perspective, you're purely from sequestrating, storing the CO2, or have a more commodity sense, where, for example, we're converting the CO2 into concrete or actually into another byproduct that you can actually make it a market. Unless if you get to that stage, which unfortunately is not the case, then actually CCS is much more likely a challenge, in terms of a dream versus a reality on how to do for many countries. So that's the background and the challenge we have the book when we started to realize that we had two separate structures for the book. First, we say, well, let's put about the context behind this. So Thomas, for example, was the one who wrote the first chapter of the book, who talks about climate change and then the just transition. So it puts a bit of the scene in terms of how to do that. Christina, which is also here and this conference as well, along with other colleagues, we're looking a little bit more from a technical perspective. What are the challenges and how actually to store the CO2 and the issues related to that. I was talking a little bit before, some other colleagues, mostly from UK actually, they wrote a chapter here about financial considerations. And the challenge is actually to really develop this, which goes back to project finance is very difficult unless you talk about UR, or if you have a carbon market in place in the given country to afford companies to take these benefits to do that. Then we talk a little bit about other colleagues from Africa. They were talking about the role here connection between CCUS and net zero, because as you see in the beginning of the presentation, some graphs, the role that CCUS play to most countries to achieve these net zero targets. Then we have a colleague here, Alexandre, he also worked here in this other chapter here. Actually, he wrote two chapters, not only this one, about the byproducts you can have from CCU, and also with Alberto, the co-author here. They also both wrote a chapter dealing with the standardization issues and the challenge that you might have actually much more actually growing influence to try to expand not only to CCS, but also to the utilization. Then also Thomas, with myself and some other colleagues, we wrote a chapter here about the legal challenges and how it's really much more focused into the sequestration. There's some challenge with liabilities, some challenge in terms of scope. And then also Karen is also here present. She talks much about also social perception, because some parts of the world, society, companies are much more embracing this technology. Other parts of the world, there are big challenges in terms of, do I really should go ahead with CCUS? What is the reality that we should go for this technology, that maybe it is the purpose of keep pumping more oil and gas, and then there are some actually adversary perspective to that. And also there is the other side of the spectrum that we need this technology to deal with climate change, energy security, and energy transition as well, and energy justice. And then we move on to chapters focused on jurisdiction. So I don't see here in the call here, but there's a colleague from Australia who actually wrote a chapter talking about developers of Australia. Myself and a few other colleagues here from the University of São Paulo was involved in this chapter here from Brazil. Then have colleagues here from the University of Calgary, actually dealing with the developers in Canada. So they had colleagues talking about Indonesia, China, Nigeria, the Netherlands, Norway, Qatar. Alberto, can you? Oh, no, I did here. I just went too far. I was slow, then went too fast. Then I also have Trinidad and Tobago, UAE, UK, and then actually United States, and then the conclusion. So this was the structure of our book, and before leading here to Thomas to continue here, so that the key issues which we find from, of course, because the book focused mostly from a legal policy regulatory perspective, but also standardization. So it's not heavily focused on technology, not heavily focused on economic issues, even though we cover some of these in a specific chapters of the book. But from a legal perspective, the challenge here, you need to well define the scope of this legislation, who owns what, and the liability in terms of, do you want to reuse an infrastructure? How about the commission? What are the challenges? Who is responsible for that? And if there's a leakage, or if there is some environmental concerns, how about the health and safety? How about studies you might have related to this for putting the CO2 there in the next few years? What might happen or might not happen? What are the legal incentives? And the challenges here as well is mostly related to going back to the core, the market. What is this business? Because putting CO2 down there is not a commodity itself. You're not selling the CO2 unless there's a carbon market. How do you do that? What is infrastructure you might need? And most likely you see a lot of this potential for CCS is correlated to a lot of offshore or even some onshore oil and gas activities. Apart from are there other ways you can really monetize this CO2? How the public perceive this as a good way forward or not so good? Why is that? Maybe it might vary from region to region. So now I leave with you, Thomas, to follow up here on these discussions.
Thanks very much, Eduardo. Could I just confirm that you can hear me, please?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Splendid. Okay, good to be here with you all, and thanks for that really interesting and helpful overview there, Eduardo. I co-edited the book with my friends and colleagues, Eduardo and Alberto. Of course, I'm Thomas Muinzer from the University of Aberdeen. I'll say a little bit more about the book generally. Eduardo set it up very well for us, and I'll say a little more and build on that. A couple of interesting points about the general background of the book. I think it's worth noting the book is part of a very interesting series, which is a fusion of Springer Nature and Palgrave Macmillan, who are two distinguished publishing houses. They fused together to try to put together a book series to address the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So as we might expect, there are 17 sub-series within this array, within this book series, the overall series, dealing with each of the goals. And then there's an 18th sub-series that deals with the notion of goals that are overlapping or multiple goals or the fusion of goals. So we sit within the SDG 7 bracket, meaning the Sustainable Development Goal 7 bracket, and SDG 7 covers affordable and clean energy. So that's the book's home within the series. Now, Eduardo has set up very well the notion that the series itself is interdisciplinary. Our book is somewhat interdisciplinary, but we do, again, as Eduardo has established well, emphasize legal political elements of CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. There's a significant emphasis on legal issues and legal regimes. That was quite important because in addition to speaking to our expertise, mine and Eduardo's and so forth, there are substantial gaps in the literature in that area. And I would pay tribute to Eduardo here. He is very good at kind of horizon scanning, I think, in the energy space, at the cutting edge of energy and ferreting out where gaps are appearing and emerging. He and I are working on hydrogen at the moment on a different project, and that's another example. We have gaps there. So Eduardo's very good, I think, at identifying these gaps in the literature, and the book is trying to help plug those gaps, and Alberto's been excellent on that too in this case. So there's quite a lot to say in the law and legal space in relation to CCUS. Eduardo's talked about the structure. He's established well there that we really have chapters 1 to 9 that are setting up background issues, contextual issues, systemic issues, drawing out big hot button issues that are really important in the area as well, trying to analyze, explore, and explicate those where possible. Then when you get to chapters 10 and 22, as Eduardo has shown us as well, we are there delving into these case study chapters of different nations and circumstances around the world that allow us to concretize the earlier chapters. The final chapter 23 is Eduardo, Alberto, and myself just drawing together some of that foregoing material and producing some recommendations that I would encourage you to read as well and see what you think of in terms of the current challenges in the sector and recommendations in going forward to operationalize the uptake of CCUS more fully. Now, a couple of comments on the form and character of CCUS that kind of emerged from the book. As early as page 6, drawing on the work of Liv and others, Eduardo, Alberto, and I are suggesting that CCUS technology primarily encompasses 4 areas: so carbon capture, carbon transportation, carbon utilization, and carbon storage. So capture, transport, utilization, and storage. And sort of right out the gate, we divest ourselves of this idea of there's a monolithic CCUS. There are core building blocks that need to be attended to carefully: tech, transportation, utilization, storage, so forth, that are disaggregated out and that all pose bespoke or novel regulatory and legal challenges and indeed opportunities. And we also take the view, and we discuss this in the conclusion in particular, that CCUS can be understood as what we call a complex socio-technical system. And what we mean by that, a complex socio-technical system, is that it tends to be resting on the interconnection of technological, economic, social, and environmental factors. And we try and unpack those systemic factors and their implications within the book. And all of this is very important because CCUS arguably has a very substantial role to play in the low carbon transition going forward. And one thing it can do that's particularly opportune is it can play a particular role, if operationalized properly, in hard to abate sectors that are very difficult to abate. This has opportunities there to mitigate some of those problems. Now, I'd also point out that we set CCUS against a particular international legal political backdrop that exists and sets the scene internationally for CCUS deployment. There are a range of points we could talk through there, but in particular, just to be brief, the Brundtland Report from 1987 is significant. It injects the notion of sustainable development into international governance and discourse. We have the UN SDGs coming in 2015, running 2015 to 2030, that are very significant. Again, in 2015, we see the Paris Agreement coming in internationally, the important international climate agreement that mandates the achievement of net zero by the second half of this century. So we have this legal political scene setting in the international space that sets the backdrop for CCUS. And again, the book unpacks that. Now, the book reveals, I think it's fair to say, certain pros and cons, certain opportunities and constraints that are acting on CCUS at the present time and in going forward. We conclude basically that the success of CCUS is going to really depend on a multidisciplinary effort that will involve scientists, policymakers, industry leaders, the public, and we talk about various actors such as those working together and adopting a systems-based approach so that the potential of this critical technology can be unlocked. A lot more to say about that, but the details in the book, so I'm just sort of whetting your appetite. And I suppose a closing point, a point that's also made in the book, is that CCUS, it doesn't exist in a bubble. It's not off on its own planet. So it exists in a context, and particularly in chapter 2, there's an emphasis that a finding that CCUS mustn't be employed as a vehicle to disincentivize or reduce the deployment of other much needed renewable and sustainable low carbon technologies. When it's at its best, it will function as a complement, as an addition to the broader low carbon transition. So in that sense, it's a tool in a broader toolbox, which is also a very interesting way to think of it as well, rather than a monolithic thing. It's in that context, and the context is important. So I'll close there. Thanks for listening, and glad to be with you all.
Thank you, Thomas. Now we'll go to Alberto. I think we can maybe. Yeah.
Which is a stranger here because I cannot see me, but yeah, that's fine. Thank you everybody for being here. This is, to be honest, it's a wonderful section to launch this book. We believe that this is a very important topic and issue when we are looking for climate change aspects in general. I would like to remember something mentioned by Thomas, that we believe that to face the climate change issues, we needed to manage a package of solutions. There is no just one thing to do, but the CCUS is a important part to be used in the future, or during today, but mostly in the future, to face the climate change issues. We are convinced that. First of all, I would like to thank you, Eduardo and Thomas, to join with me and arrange the efforts around the world, because there is people participating in this book from several different countries. So this is an amazing initiative. It is interesting. 1 month ago, 2 months ago, I was participating in the meeting in Shell Center in Amsterdam, and during the week, CCUS week, with participating of the people from European community, and the girl, it was a woman in charge of a very high-level political connected with the climate change issues. She told me that never have noticed this kind of type of information putting together like a book, because in this event in Amsterdam, we are promoting or starting the promotion of the book, or noticing that we are launching a book today. And she was surprised to notice that we are doing this. So this is just to say that this is very, very new information around the world related to CCUS. And this is a very, very great information. By my side, because we are more involved in the standardization aspect, I would like just to share that the technological and technical aspect is just in the beginning around the world. There is a lot of barriers. There is a lot of challenges to face it. But we are looking for several groups around the world and people inside each country being involved in to develop new technologies to capture, use, and storage CO2. Here in Brazil, we are leading a technical committee connected with the standardization body in Brazil. And there is a particular committee to manage CCUS aspects. In fact, we are starting a new project, almost finishing the project, to clarify the technology to be used in utilization aspects. There is a lot of, as Eduardo said before, there is a much more information, papers, documents related to storage, to capture and storage, and the utilization is a very quite new part of the problem or the solution that we are leading here in Brazil. So in the next few months, maybe we will be publishing first standard in Brazil, touching the aspects related to utilization. But we have an international community together with the International Standardization Organization, ISO field, a specific committee managing CCS in a connected committee in Europe talking about CCUS. This is a very trick or very funny question, Because in the ISO, we are not talking about utilization. We are talking only carbon capture and storage. We are not using the word use or the word utilization. And in the European field, they are considering utilization and including the utilization aspects in the discussion of new technologies. The reason is the people in international fields, mainly when we're talking about ISO, believes that utilization can be misunderstanding or misunderstood when we are looking for CO2 use. The funny thing is that we needed to provide several different solutions when we were talking about CO2. Utilization could be covered together with these things. Eduardo mentioned the UR aspects that there is being used a lot here in Brazil, mainly by Petrobras when we were talking about UR. But there is some definitions or terminology issues to be completely understood. This is the reason because the ISO is not touching formally the utilization word. But now, in fact, we are looking for the future and in trying to incorporate the utilization in the aspects of next documents to be provided. So there is a very, very large field for work, a lot of challenges, a lot of barriers, and we believe that this initiative could contribute with some reflection, some discussion, some upgrade related to what is happening around the world when we are talking about CCUS. That's it for my side. I would like to thank you again, you all, for participating in these things and this event. And I think I come back to Eduardo to manage some questions or some other participations. I'm not sure here in personal. We have two other authors, Alexander and Karen. I don't know if you would like to say some brief things related to each chapter you provided, you are in charge of. Maybe
and
we
also
have
online as well, because Christina as well is also.
Oh, Christina,
If they, it's a good point, because now we're open towards the end to not only Q&A, but
Yeah.
also comments. So especially if you have contributors in the book who want to add a little bit what they have done or some key sites, now it's a good time. It's better to come here. Because they're gonna.
No, parto.
Oh, Christina, you want to go first?
Meu coisa encima.
Yes.
Momento, tem que tirar
Já
isso.
tirei.
Aí, assim.
No, about the chapter, what we did was trying to give the.
Christina, like, your voice is a little bit far away. Are you close to the microphone?
Yes, I'm trying. You listen now?
Now it's better.
Okay.
That's better.
Because what we did with this chapter was trying to focus in all different storage solutions, because there are a lot. As everyone knows, the aware are the most viable, technically speaking and economically speaking, as well as Eduardo already spoke, because we need always to think about the money that we need to apply to develop these different technologies. But I think it's important to start seeing that we cannot move from this. We need to start applying in all different technologies, because this is actually a problem that all over the world we will need to manage to have a budget to work in these different options that we have. And as everyone already noticed, to do CCUS technologies will be the best solution to answer to this huge problem, because we need to arrange a way to put money in these different projects. So what we did, we try to focus the different options that we have, put in the table that mineralization is important, because we can use CO2 even to produce uranium. We can do CO2 storing gas hydrate. We can do geothermal using CO2. So there are different options that we need to focus and start applying what we can. And there are regulations that we need to improve a lot, because as I think it was Alberto that was talking, we are in the beginning. As everyone already knows, the first directive was built in 2009, and not a lot changed from that point, but in terms of legislation, but a lot of different projects already was developed all over the world. It's important to notice that everyone was trying to fix in the push sequestration. It was the first way that they think that the directive will work, but as everyone already knows, we need to pay this, because this is a really expensive technologies. Okay, so I think everyone is working in the same subject, in the same project. So I really enjoy to work in this project, and thank to everyone. Okay.
Hello, everybody. I'll give a little glimpse of the chapter that I've contributed in the book, picking up some comments that we had previously from the other speakers. I wrote the chapter talking about the CCU-based products. So there we have constructed some approach to the different routes where we can use carbon to develop some products. And in these different routes, we can achieve some products where we have a different permanence of the carbon that are captured. So this is related to some graphics that Eduardo showed in the beginning of his presentation, with some difference between carbon removal and what is current. It's mainly understood as CCS and CCU, related to the difference from the short-term storage and long-term storage, which is another topic that also Alberto mentioned, that we are discussing this question, how we can define it's a long-term storage, how long is this storage. We also have a lot of discussions in other standardization fields, particularly related to the accounting of these emissions to inventories or carbon footprints of products, and the other projects related to the net zero accounting that companies are aiming to develop in the context of their country's national determined contributions related to the Paris Agreement. And mainly we have covered these technical aspects on the CCU-based products in the chapter, and some of this work has led to the technical development in our technical committee here in Brazil that Alberto mentioned, that we are aiming to publish in the near future. The standard, it will be, at least to my knowledge, the first CCU-related standard focusing on the technological routes. So I think I finished my contribution.
Thanks very much, Alexandre. Karen, would you like to say some words?
Speak from here.
Okay.
The microphone closer, and then I don't have to move everybody.
Yeah.
Well, hello. Thank you very much for listening to it.
I worked together with 2 other co-authors on the chapter focusing on social perception and acceptance of CCS and CCU. And so really, my colleagues work with different parts of it, so that was interesting. One of my colleagues worked with, or co-authors, she works with the area of really understanding it by the technical point of view. So she brought this kind of, and seeing the different processes and the different parts of the process. So understanding a bit how is this approached and how is it seen by the different publics. And really, the other co-author comes from the psychology area, as I do. So we work together in understanding how the people perceive this. And when we talk about social perception, we talk about all the different stakeholders you can be involved, like government, the industry, media, you can have the investors, and you can have also the lay public and also the academics. So we look at all the different aspects of this, looking at the different people looking at this. So the main things is really CCS obviously is not very known by the public in general, and CCU even less. So there are very little studies on that. So there's a lot of challenges for you to understand a bit more about that. So we try to look at this, looking at the pathways you choose to do it and which are the impacts that most focus on what the people are worried about. But safety is one of the main aspects they look at. So so they really want to know if this is safe. Well, I think the rest you can read in the book. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Karen, as well. So I just open the floor now.
I don't know if there is any other.
Yeah, let me see. Can you from the view here? I did not see. Open like the participants to check. To the right, yes, there. Go down. I don't think so. But if anyone would just want to add any comment or question, we still have around 10 minutes or so. And you can also write the chat if you prefer as well. There's also another challenge we have for this event as well was time zones, you know? For example, right now is almost 3 p.m. here in Brazil, but then also I think in the UK, you might be actually around 4 hours ahead, and some other colleagues in Middle East, maybe 6, maybe 5, 4 hours, and if you go further in Asia, even like evening time.
People are sleeping. That's in Asia.
Yeah.
The people are sleeping.
Yeah, so it's hard to find the time that we can fit everybody here, but we tried our best here to find something. But I'm pleased that actually Christina was here as well, some other colleagues as well, and including Karen and Ashandri, on the top of my co-editors here as well.
Yeah.
Yes, please. How do we?
So, whatever you just have to speak loud with the voice microphone. Reach.
Whatever you just told me, probably everybody knows it. I am Professor Sonia Coelho, and I work in here project on biology. And I just wanted to ask you, if when you discussed with Brazil, if you included facts, or you did only CCUS and not biology?
That's the room for the next book. That's what we're looking for the next book, because we focus on CCUS. No, the nearby future we hope to do more things on bags, because I think that Brazil has a lot of potential, including a natural solution in bags, but because of comparison, you know, it will be a bit awkward to put bags in Brazil, not the others in here and there. To be more consistent, we only covered CCUS, but certainly bags and natural-based solutions are options here for nearby future publications.
Okay.
But to put some news in the side of the standardization. So in the last meeting I mentioned in Amsterdam, it was a plenary meeting from ISO TC 265. This is the most important technical committee managing CCS aspects. We heard the first movement to include BECS inside the topics to be covered by the technical committee. So it's a raising. BECS is the people are paying attention and trying to address some solutions, including BECS in the context of the CCS.
Yes, because when we include BECS, we can even have the negative emissions.
Yeah.
So in fact, a very win-win situation.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Certainly good insight what you plan in the nearby future.
Yeah.
Please. I can help you with the feedback.
We certainly should talk about that. Any other questions, comments?
Another comment.
Yeah.
maybe.
Sure.
We don't know also recently, but we built a chapter together with Professor Karen about BECS and social protection. I think it was a nice chapter with a preliminary approach of perception.
Or even an interesting comparison, like what is the public perception between natural-based solution, BECS, and CCUS, right? Does it matter? Doesn't matter? Is it all the same thing? Could they all different things from a public perspective, from the public, from an average person? If you talk to them, what do they think from these three technologies? Do they think they all contribute? Some of them contribute or don't contribute. That could be an interesting publication to see that. Of course, technically speaking, certainly not the same. Of course, they all can contribute differently to the energy transition, but how the public, for example, Thomas, like from the UK there, how do you see that maybe the overall public don't support CCUS? And how about maybe is it different from BECS to natural solution, or really doesn't matter?
Yeah, that's a interesting question. I mean, I haven't looked carefully at polling, if there is polling on this, and maybe our colleague who's the great social expert there may be able to enlighten me about our experience here in the UK, but it certainly, I think it's a very niche issue. It's not part of the mainstream public discourse, and therefore probably it's not, by not being part of the discourse, it's probably not A, high in the public consciousness, and B, something that the average everyday person might in fact not be, when we've touched on this already, but not even be aware of. And certainly the distinction between CCS and CCU or something like that would be very novel, and it might be rare that an everyday member of the public would be appraised of those distinctions. So I think as this is driven forward in the UK, there is a risk that there could be a gap between the everyday person and a governmental policy agenda, which would need to be looked at. It's a gap that would need to be closed, and ideally the public would be brought along with things. So it's less top down and more bottom up,
Yeah. How about the Cristina? That I know you are based also between Portugal and Angola. What do you think that from an African perspective, what do they see as CCUS? Is that really for this reality, or they really intend to maybe move closer to analyze and develop those things?
In Angola, everything is new. They even don't know exactly what it is. I have some students, they are just beginning, because the most part of population, they just don't know. Some people in the government, they already listen something, but they don't know what is. Okay, so in terms of perspective, the common person in Angola is really a nightmare. Everything is new.
And how about from a government perspective, like you see they're trying to move closer to more of this?
They are noticed the okay, there are issues in the table that they need to start thinking about them, but there are not exactly in the moment a policy to do something. Okay, there are some companies individually, not in terms of the government, they are trying to schedule something, but since they are not exactly in the way to understand what Angola can do it. So I'm.
And how about Portugal, Cristina? How about Portugal, your opinion?
In Portugal, okay. In Portugal, we are ready. We even have the directive of 2009 implemented here in Portugal. But the public perception is putting a lot of pressure, and the concept of CCUS, they are always related to producing oil and gas. They don't see this in a different way. They don't think that we can help doing the transition in a better way. They are always thinking what everyone is always thought in the past, that we are just using this to obtain more fossil fuels. So, but in terms of government, we already have a lot of things well established. You already during the beginning of 2010, we tried to put some markers in terms of carbon credits. Some companies align on that, others no. But I think in Portugal we are obliged because we are in Europe, okay? But going a little bit back in terms of what Karen was saying, in terms of public perception, this is not general public. They, even today, with a lot of information, everything's in the internet, they don't understand this. They don't want to change what is business as usual, okay? But in terms of government, a lot of things is already in the table, and we are obliged to do a lot of things. We are obliged to follow the rules that are already been established in terms of Europe. Okay, so I'm working two different, completely different countries. In one, they don't know, the general people don't know what is this. Okay, just a few persons. And in Portugal, okay, we already are well implemented. The most part of population, they still not understand, and they don't want to understand, but this is, I think is like this everywhere, okay? But I think we are improving, and we still need to do this kind of initiatives, because one thing that I really want to say, we need to work in all different options. Everyone is always asking me, what do you think is better to do this or do that? And I'm always saying everything. We need to apply in all the solutions, because it's important not to believe in just one and do just applying in one, because we need all the options. We need, even if they don't help a lot, they will help. So let's do all to work in all the options that we have in the table.
Exactly, Cristina, because even if you think what's going on with AI, the amount of energy AI will consume, and if you see actually most experts saying that what we need is energy. Doesn't matter where it comes from, we need more energy because the world needs. And just to conclude, I think we have a final question there, is that I think was Leonard, that the challenge you see from the map there, you don't see a lot of developments in the African continent, it is exactly what you point, because it's not about the access to technology. You can have access to technology, but the question is, can you pay for that? That's the question. And who's going to pay for that? And then because in the Middle East, the government is putting his own money to do that, because there is actually a policy orientated for that. Other countries, they have a carbon market who will help you to tailor to go there, or you have both in place. But unfortunately, in the Global South, either is lacking financial resources or actually fiscal incentives and governmental support. And the companies, of course, they're looking from a business perspective where it makes more sense to business, So ultimately, I think we have to conclude the event here. Thanks for everybody here.
No, we are taking a picture. That's the only thing we want to do because there are people that have to leave.
Yes.
And we wanted the people that are
Oh, okay, so
online to
please
be
stay.
included.
So please stay.
We're not.
Please
we don't
stay. We
want to
have
do
just a picture to make before we end this session. So I think we need to use them with the, yes. No.
Você consegue fazer para todo mundo?
Stop presenting.
Não, esse aqui é bom, que esse aqui é o livro.
Okay.
Okay, come on. We stand here together.
Yeah.
And then we take a picture with the people that are online.
Okay.
If the people can open them. Then- Eu aqui, pois?
Essa câmera desse notebook aqui, ó. Você fecha, Eduardo. Só a câmera aqui do.
Ele vai arrumar. Pode deixar ele. Mostra que é o livro, tá? Mas eu queria que aparecesse aqui.
tirar esse cara daqui.
Não dá fazendo. Pode vir.
Alguém me chama.
Nossa, por favor, alguém importante. Agora ficou bom. Oh, now we have people here. Okay. Isso. Okay.
Okay, thank you everyone.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, good evening, and all the best. Thank you, Thomas. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All the best. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.
Desliga.
Não, mas
Desliga.
Quais?